One of the most sought after classes in all of gaming is the Necromancer, the class that can sap life from opponents and summon legions of undead to their side. But will Baldur's Gate 3 have a Necromancer class? Yes and no. Stick around to find out how far Larian may take us into the world of Necromancy. As many of you are aware, Baldur's Gate 3 heavily references Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and this of course goes for the classes and subclasses that will be in the game. To get the bad news out of the way, there is no D&D 5th edition class called the Necromancer, but there is a Necromancer arcane tradition for the wizard class and also a cleric domain called the Death Domain. There's also several features and spells that explore the cosmic forces of life, death, and undeath, and more than just the wizard and cleric class can have access to these dark arts. I'll start off by going over the Necromancer subclass for the wizard, which is very likely to end up in the game come official release, and then I'll get into the Death Cleric and also several of the Necromancy spells that are in the player's handbook. At level 2 as a wizard, you'll get the opportunity to choose the Necromancer class. Necromancer wizards have learned to sap the life force from creatures and transform that energy into magical power that can be manipulated. Right away at level 2, Necromancers get a subclass specific feature called Grim Harvest. Once per turn, when you kill one or more creatures with a first level spell or higher, you regain hit points equal to twice the spell's level, or 3 times its level if the spell belongs to the school of Necromancy. Every spell in D&D belongs to one of the 8 schools of magic, so if you do kill a creature with a Necromancy spell, such as the level 3 spell Vampiric Touch, you'll get 9 hit points back, and this can occur once per turn. It's a cool passive way to get some free heals, but do note that Grim Harvest does not work when you use a cantrip to kill an enemy, and will also not work on undead or constructs. At level 6, you get the feature called Undead Thralls, which is a buff to the Animate Dead spell. Let's talk about Animate Dead before we go any further. Animate Dead is a level 3 spell that's on the Wizard and Cleric spell list. With this spell, you'll choose a pile of bones or a corpse of a medium or small humanoid, so no animating giants, and the spell will imbue the target with a foul mimicry of life, raising a skeleton or a zombie that in D&D can last for 24 hours before you have to cast the spell again, so in Baldur's Gate 3 this would likely last until you take a long rest. With your bonus action, you can command your undead creature and decide what action that creature will take and where you want it to move to. This obviously can be very useful in combat, but also there's probably some RP ways that you can find a good use for it. If you upcast Animate Dead, you'll animate 2 additional undead creatures for each spell slot above 3rd level. So let's say that max level in Baldur's Gate 3 ends up being 13 or 14. That would mean that you could upcast Animate Dead as a level 7 spell, which would allow you to animate 9 undead creatures at one time with just this spell alone. Pretty cool. So back to the level 6 Necromancer subclass feature called Undead Thralls. Undead Thralls will give you the Animate Dead spell if you don't already have it, and will also allow you to target 1 additional corpse or pile of bones, creating another zombie or skeleton to fight by your side. So if you cast it at its base level of 3, you can raise 2 undead, while a regular wizard or cleric would only be able to raise 1. Undead Thralls also gives additional benefits whenever you create an undead using a necromancy spell, and these benefits include raising the max hit points of your undead, and also giving your minions the ability to add your proficiency bonus to their weapon damage rolls. So overall, you just have much more powerful undead minions. At level 10, your Necromancer will gain Inured to Undeath, which gives you resistance to necrotic damage, which means that you'll only take half necrotic damage, and it also makes it so that your hit point maximum can no longer be reduced. There may be some spells in the game that can temporarily cause a reduction to max hit points, but these spells will not affect a level 10 Necromancer wizard. At level 14, you get another really cool Necromancer feature called Command Undead, which allows you at the cost of your action to attempt to bring 1 undead under your control. Keep in mind that these are creatures that are already animated. So if you walk into a room of skeletons, you have the power to potentially command one of them. The undead target that you choose will have to fail a charisma saving throw in order to fall under your command. This feature does have unlimited use, but like I said, it does cost an action, so you can only use it once per turn, and you also can only command one undead at a time, so if you switch targets, you'll lose control of your first undead. And that is it for the Necromancer subclass for the Wizard. If you're really into the dark arts of raising and controlling the dead, there's a lot of great benefits that you can get by going this route. Now let's get into the Death Domain Cleric, and this subclass is actually not in the player's handbook, but it is in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which is one of the 3 5th edition books that Larian is heavily referencing, so I think it's worthy of being mentioned in this video. If this one sounds a bit too speculative for your liking, feel free to jump on over to the next part where I go over all of the necromancy spells that are in the player's handbook, chapter markers below. Death Domain Clerics are concerned with the forces that cause death, as well as the negative energy that gives rise to undead creatures. If this subclass does end up being in the game, you'll be choosing this right away at level 1 in character creation. You'll not only get martial weapon proficiency, allowing your cleric to use the best weapons in the game, but you'll also get Death Domain spells. These are spells that will be prepared for your cleric at all times, and a few of them are spells that are not on the general cleric spell list. At level 1, you get False Life and Ray of Sickness. False Life gives you temporary hit points, and Ray of Sickness, which is not on the cleric spell list, lets you deal poison damage from afar. At level 3, Death Clerics get Blindness and Ray of Enfeeblement. Blindness will of course magically blind an enemy, and Ray of Enfeeblement is a debuff to an enemy's weapon attacks. At level 5, we have the level 3 spell Animate Dead, which I talked about earlier, and also Vampiric Touch, both of which are not in the game yet, as in early access we only have access to level 2 spells. Vampiric Touch I'm fairly certain will be in the game, and it's a Warlock and Wizard spell. It requires concentration, and what you do is you make a melee spell attack against a creature within reach, and if it hits, you'll end up dealing 3d6 necrotic damage and also regaining hit points equal to half the amount of necrotic damage that you deal, and this can be upcasted. Since this spell is not on the cleric spell list, this is a powerful necromancy spell for a Death Domain Cleric to have access to. At level 7, Death Domain Clerics get Blight and Death Ward. Blight is a Druid, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard spell, and it deals massive ranged necrotic damage if an enemy fails a Constitution save. And if you use Blight on a plant creature, that creature will have disadvantage on their save and take maximum damage. Blight cannot be used on undead or constructs. Death Ward is a Cleric and Paladin spell that gives a target creature a measure of protection against death, as the first time that they would drop to 0 hit points, they will instead drop to 1 hit point. And the last 2 Death Domain spells, which you get at level 9, are Anti-Life Shell and Cloud Kill. Anti-Life Shell is a Druid Abjuration concentration spell that you cast on yourself, and it extends a shimmering barrier out from you, hedging out creatures other than undead and constructs. Cloud Kill is a Sorcerer and Wizard spell that creates a giant deadly sphere of poisonous fog. Moving on from the domain spells, at level 1 as a Death Domain Cleric, you also get a feature called Reaper, which lets your cleric learn 1 necromancy cantrip of your choice from any class's spell list. Reaper also makes it so that when your cleric casts a necromancy cantrip that normally only targets 1 creature, the spell can instead target 2 creatures that are within 5 feet of each other. If Larian includes the cantrip called Toll the Dead, which deals 1d12 necrotic damage to targets that don't have full hit points, this can be a really powerful combination for a cantrip. At level 2 as a Death Domain Cleric, your clerics will get a channeled divinity called Touch of Death. Touch of Death allows your cleric to do a melee attack and deal extra necrotic damage to the target. Your channeled divinity at level 2 can only be used once per short or long rest, but at cleric level 6 this increases to 2 uses. At level 6, Death Clerics get Inescapable Destruction, which makes necrotic damage that your clerics deal through Necromancy Spells or Channeled Divinity now ignore resistances to necrotic damage that your opponents may have. They cannot escape your necrotic power. Level 8 brings with it Divine Strike, which gives the cleric the ability to imbue their weapon strikes with necrotic energy. Once on each of the cleric's turn, when they strike an opponent with a weapon attack, the cleric can cause the attack to deal an extra 1d8 necrotic damage, and this damage increases to 2d8 at level 14. And those are the two subclasses that I think represent necromancy well for those of you that love these types of builds. I really hope that both of them are included in the game. I do think it's highly likely that we will see the wizard necromancer, but I'm not as sure about the death domain cleric. So I did go over a few necromancy spells when talking about those subclasses, but to end the video, I'm going to briefly mention all of the player's handbook necromancy spells. You don't have to play as those two subclasses to do plenty of necromancer type stuff. Starting with cantrips, we have Chill Touch, which is already in the game and it deals necrotic damage. It also prevents the target from being able to receive heals for 2 turns. This cantrip is on the Sorcerer, Wizard, and Warlock spell list. Spare the Dying is a necromancy cantrip that probably won't be in the game, as the help action that all players have access to basically does the same thing. Toll the Dead is not in the player's handbook, but I wanted to mention again because I really hope that it finds its way into the game, as it's a quite powerful ranged cantrip. Toll the Dead deals 1d12 necrotic damage to enemies that don't have full hit points and 1d8 to those that do. Moving on to level 1 spells, we already have the Wizard and Sorcerer spell called False Life, which gives the caster 5 temporary hit points. Inflict Wounds is a level 1 cleric spell that infuses their hands with necrotic energy, dealing 3d10 necrotic damage. Ray of Sickness is a sorcerer and wizard spell that deals 2d8 poison damage. Blindness is a level 2 necromancy spell where if the enemy fails a constitution saving throw, they become blind. Gentle Repose is a cleric and wizard spell that's not currently in the game that protects a corpse from being able to become undead. Ray of Enfeeblement is a level 2 necromancy spell that's already in the game, and it's a ranged spell that makes the target deal half weapon damage. Animate Dead is a level 3 cleric and wizard spell, and I talked a lot about it earlier. It animates the dead. Bestow Curse is a level 3 bard, cleric, and wizard concentration spell that you use on an opponent and you curse them, giving them disadvantage on certain ability checks and saving throws, and they'll also have disadvantage on attack rolls made against you, and your attacks and spells will deal an extra 1d8 necrotic damage to them. Feign Death is a level 3 bard, cleric, and druid spell where you can touch a target, making them appear to be dead. This target will have resistance to all damage except psychic damage. Revivify is a cleric and paladin spell that revives a creature, basically the same thing as having a resurrection scroll. Speak with the Dead is a level 3 spell that's already in the game even though it's level 3, and the least spoiler way for you to acquire it is by finding the Speak with Dead amulet. This spell on its own is a bard and cleric spell, and in my opinion it's one of the most fun non-combat spells to use in the game. Vampiric Touch is the last level 3 spell here, and it's on the Warlock and Wizard spell list. Vampiric Touch deals necrotic damage, but it also heals the caster for half the damage that's dealt. Blight is a level 4 druid, sorcerer, warlock, and wizard spell that I mentioned earlier. It deals a ton of necrotic damage on a failed save, and it's also super effective against plant creatures. Contagion is a level 5 necromancy spell on the cleric and druid spell list. This spell can inflict one of several diseases onto an opponent. Raise Dead is a level 5 bard, cleric, and paladin spell that is similar to Revivify, but in 5th edition, Revivify has to be used in a shorter time span after a creature has died, while Raise Dead you have much more time. In Baldur's Gate 3 they might just be the same, except of course in spell level, and this is also a way that you can give your bard resurrection spell capabilities. Circle of Death is a level 6 sorcerer, warlock, and wizard necromancy spell. This spell creates a sphere of negative energy, and creatures within it have to make saving throws to reduce the necrotic damage that they will be taking. Create Undead is a level 6 cleric, warlock, and wizard spell that can only be cast at night, so I'm not sure how Baldur's Gate 3 will do this, if they even include it at all. With this spell you can choose up to 3 corpses and turn them into ghouls under your control. Eyebite is a level 6 bard, sorcerer, warlock, and wizard concentration spell, where your eyes will become an inky void imbued with dread power. On each of your turns, you can use your action to force a creature that fails a wisdom saving throw to fall asleep, become panicked, dash away, or become sickened. You can do this to multiple creatures over the course of holding your concentration. Harm is a level 6 cleric necromancy spell that diseases a creature on a failed save, and it causes them to take 14d6 necrotic damage and also lowers their hit point maximum. Magic Jar is a level 6 necromancy wizard spell that probably won't be in the game. Finger of Death is a level 7 sorcerer, warlock, and wizard range spell that causes searing pain to a target, dealing 7d8 plus 3 necrotic damage on a failed save. Humanoids that are killed by this spell will also rise at the start of your next turn as a zombie that is permanently under your command, a very necromancy type spell. Resurrection is a level 7 bard and cleric spell that can actually resurrect a creature that's been dead for no more than a century that didn't die of old age. No idea how or if this one will be in the game, but I guess it would be cool if Larian let us resurrect some of the corpses that we come across. Now getting into level 8 and 9 necromancy spells, which would not come until our character hits level 15 and 17 respectively. But I think that the max level in Baldur's Gate 3 will be less than 15, so I wouldn't get too excited here, but who knows. Clone is a level 8 wizard spell that allows you to duplicate a living creature as a safeguard against death. If the original creature dies, that creature's soul will transfer to the clone. Astral Projection is a level 9 cleric, warlock, and wizard necromancy spell, where you and up to 8 willing creatures can project their bodies into the astral plane. I don't think we players will get access to this spell, of course, but it is possible that it could be in the game. Maybe even an NPC uses it on us. If Larian has created some content that takes place on the astral plane, which is where the Githyanki race lives, I definitely think it's possible that our means for transportation to there could be through this spell. And the last player's handbook necromancy spell is the level 9 true resurrection spell that allows the caster to resurrect a creature that's been dead for no longer than 200 years that didn't die of old age. Probably not going to be in the game, but I wanted to briefly mention it. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys are like me, I'm very hyped to see how far Larian takes Necromancy. Necromancer Wizard and Death Domain Cleric sound like they would be a ton of fun. Thanks again for helping me get to 100,000 subscribers, and of course, Baldur's Gate 3 content will continue up to its release and of course several years beyond.